The Karelian mining colony on Zirion 7 had been sending distress signals for 3 standard days. Captain Zextal of the merchant vessel Starwind Dancer watched the orange dwarf star pulse weakly in the distance as his ship's sensors picked up the automated beacon once again. "Same message, Captain," reported his communications officer, a young Valyrian named Nyx. "Colony under attack by hegemony raiders. Requesting immediate assistance. Civilian population at risk." Zextal's forearms drummed against his command chair in frustration. The Karelians were peaceful miners, their 6-legged forms perfectly adapted for the underground work that kept the galactic economy running. They had no military, no defenses beyond basic shields around their settlements. When the hegemony raiders came, they were sitting targets. "Any response from the Galactic Defense Fleet?" Zextal asked, though he already knew the answer. "Negative, sir. Nearest GDF squadron is 47 light-years away, engaged with hegemony forces near the spiral arm colonies. Estimated arrival time is 6 standard days." 6 days. Zextal's translator implant conveyed the weight of those words perfectly. By then, the colony would be nothing but smoking ruins and empty slave transport holds. The hegemony's reputation for brutality was legendary across known space. "Sir," Nyx's voice carried a tremor of fear. "We're detecting multiple energy signatures dropping out of hyperspace near the colony. Large vessels." The main display flickered to life, showing the tactical readout of the Zirion system. Zextal's blood ran cold as he counted the contacts. 7 ships, each one massing at least 5 times his own vessel. The distinctive angular profiles of hegemony destroyers filled the screen. "By the void," whispered his navigator, a crystalline Cytherian whose body chimed with anxiety. "Those aren't raiders. That's a full battle squadron." Zextal stared at the display in growing horror. Raiders were one thing, pirates and scavengers looking for quick profits. But a battle squadron meant something far worse. The hegemony wasn't just raiding Zirion 7. They were claiming it. The Karelian mining operation was one of the most productive in this sector, pulling rare earth elements from deep beneath the planet's crust. Elements that were essential for hyperspace drive construction. If the hegemony controlled Zirion 7, they could cut off hyperspace technology from half the galaxy. "Captain," Nyx's voice cracked. "The hegemony ships are broadcasting on all frequencies. They're demanding surrender of the colony within 2 standard hours, or they'll begin orbital bombardment." "What about the evacuation ships?" Zextal demanded. 3 civilian transports launched from the surface before the hegemony arrived, but... Nyx paused, his green skin paling to a sickly yellow. "Sir, the hegemony ships are targeting them. They're calling them hostile vessels." On the tactical display, Zextal watched in mounting rage as the massive hegemony destroyers adjusted course to intercept the fleeing civilian ships. There were families aboard those transports. Children. Elderly Karelians who had spent their entire lives in the mines, contributing to galactic civilization. "Those aren't hostile vessels," he snarled. "Those are refugees." "The hegemony doesn't recognize the distinction," his navigator chimed sadly. "Their doctrine classifies any vessel fleeing a combat zone as a potential military asset." Zextal knew the hegemony's so-called doctrine. It was an excuse for murder, plain and simple. The authoritarian empire had been expanding aggressively for the past decade, using increasingly brutal tactics to seize resource-rich worlds. The Galactic Council issued stern condemnations and imposed economic sanctions, but words meant nothing when faced with plasma cannons and fusion warheads. "Sir, should we withdraw?" asked his weapons officer, a nervous Ultarian whose scales were shifting to deep purple, a sign of extreme stress in his species. "We can't engage 7 destroyers. It would be suicide." Zextal stared at the display, his mind racing. The Ultarian was right. His merchant vessel was armed, but only with basic defensive systems designed to ward off pirates. Against a hegemony battle squadron, the Starwind Dancer would last perhaps 30 seconds. But those civilian transports. "How long until the destroyers intercept the refugees?" he asked. 18 minutes at current speed, Nyx reported. 18 minutes. Zextal closed his eyes and thought of his own family back on the Valyrian homeworld. His mate. His 3 cubs. They lived in peace because others had chosen to fight when fighting seemed impossible. "Plot an intercept course," he ordered quietly. "Sir?" The weapons officer's scales had now shifted to bright yellow.
Captain, with respect, we cannot. I'm not asking us to fight 7 destroyers, Zextal interrupted. We're going to buy time. Get between them and the transports.
Maybe we can force them to slow down, negotiate, something.
The hegemony doesn't negotiate, his navigator chimed grimly.
Then, we die with honor, Zextal said simply.
Helm, full power to engines. Communications, send a message to the transports. Tell them to push their engines beyond safe limits. Every second counts. The Starwind Dancer lurched forward, its aging fusion drives straining to achieve maximum velocity.
Around the bridge, his crew worked with grim determination.
None of them spoke about the odds.
They all knew this was likely their final voyage.
Minutes passed like hours as they raced toward the intercept point. The civilian transports were pushing their engines hard, but their cargo holds were full of refugees, slowing them down. The hegemony destroyers maintained their pursuit with predatory patience. Incoming transmission from the lead destroyer, Nyx announced. They're ordering us to withdraw immediately or be destroyed. Ignore it, Zextal ordered. How's our position? We'll reach the intercept point 2 minutes before they reach the transports, his navigator reported. Good.
When we arrive, bring us to a full stop directly in their path.
Make them go around us.
Sir, if they decide to simply destroy us. Then, they waste time and ammunition doing it, Zextal said grimly.
Time the transports can use to escape.
The bridge fell silent except for the hum of straining engines and the soft beeping of tactical displays. Zextal watched the countdown timer mark their approach to what would likely be their deaths. He thought of all the merchant voyages he'd made over the years, the countless worlds he'd visited, the diverse species he'd met. The galaxy was vast and beautiful and worth protecting.
Contact in 60 seconds, his weapons officer announced. All stop when we reach the coordinates, Zextal ordered. Power to maximum shields.
Broadcast our vessel identification and demand they recognize our right to safe passage under galactic maritime law.
Do you think they'll listen? Nyx asked quietly. No, Zextal admitted. But someone needs to stand witness. Someone needs to say that what they're doing is wrong.
The timer reached 0, and the Starwind Dancer dropped out of hyperspace directly in the path of the approaching destroyer squadron.
The massive warships loomed on the viewscreen like metallic mountains, their hulls bristling with weapon emplacements.
Broadcasting now, Nyx reported, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. The response came immediately.
Not words, but action.
The lead destroyer's forward plasma batteries began to charge, energy building to deadly levels.
Incoming fire, shouted the weapons officer.
But, before the hegemony ship could discharge its weapons, space itself seemed to tear open behind the civilian transports. Reality warped and twisted, and something vast began to emerge from the fold in spacetime.
What in the void? Zextal breathed.
The ship that materialized was unlike anything he had ever seen. Where Galactic Council vessels were elegant curves and smooth lines, and hegemony ships were brutal angles and aggressive protrusions, this vessel was something entirely different. It was massive, easily 3 times the length of the largest hegemony destroyer, but its design spoke of functionality over intimidation. The hull was a dark gray metal that seemed to absorb light, broken by strange geometric patterns that might have been armor plating or weapon systems.
Are those letters?
Nyx whispered, pointing at markings along the ship's hull.
Zextal squinted at the alien script.
The translator implant in his brain struggled to process the symbols before finally producing a result that made no sense.
TFS Indomitable, he read aloud. What's TFS? Unknown vessel, came a transmission from the hegemony flagship. You are interfering with a legitimate military operation. Withdraw immediately or face destruction.
The response that came back was in a language none of them had heard before, but the translation arrived a moment later in accented but clear galactic standard.
This is Captain Sarah Chen of the Terran Federation ship Indomitable. You are targeting civilian vessels in violation of interstellar law. Cease hostile actions immediately and withdraw from this system. Zextal felt his heart skip a beat. Terran Federation?
He had heard rumors, whispers of a new species that had recently achieved interstellar flight somewhere in the outer rim. But no one had made contact with them. They were supposed to be primitives, barely capable of basic space travel.
The ship hanging in space before them was anything but primitive. Unknown alien vessel, the hegemony commander responded with obvious irritation. This system is under hegemony jurisdiction. You have no authority here. Withdraw or be destroyed. There was a pause before the human captain replied, and, when she did, her voice carried a chill that made Zextal's translator implant struggle to convey the emotional undertones. Negative. This system contains civilians under attack by military forces. By the laws of war recognized by civilized species throughout the galaxy, I am authorized to intervene. You have 30 seconds to cease targeting civilian vessels and withdraw to a distance of no less than 50,000 kilometers. The hegemony commander's response was predictable. You dare threaten the hegemony? Prepare to die, alien. The massive destroyer squadron began to turn toward the human vessel, their weapon systems charging. Zextal watched in fascination and terror as 7 of the most powerful warships in known space prepared to engage this mysterious newcomer. Unknown vessel, Terran ship, Zextal transmitted urgently. This is Captain Zextal of the merchant vessel Starwind Dancer. You need to withdraw immediately. Those are hegemony destroyers. Your ship is outnumbered 7-1. The human captain's response surprised him. Thank you for the warning, Captain. Please escort the civilian transports to a safe distance. We'll handle the destroyers. Handle them? Zextal stared at the tactical display in disbelief. The human ship was massive, yes, but 7-1 odds were impossible for any vessel to overcome. He was about to watch these brave aliens die in a pointless gesture. The first hegemony destroyer opened fire, its primary plasma cannon sending a bolt of superheated energy across space. The beam struck the human ship's shields, and Zextal expected to see the newcomer's defenses collapse under the assault. Instead, the energy simply dissipated harmlessly across what appeared to be an impossibly strong defensive field. Interesting, came Captain Shen's voice. Is that the best you can do? The hegemony flagship immediately signaled the other destroyers, and all 7 ships opened fire simultaneously. The space around the human vessel lit up like a small star as plasma beams, particle cannons, and fusion torpedoes struck its shields. When the light faded, the TFS Indomitable hung in space completely undamaged. Our turn, Captain Shen said calmly. The human ship's response was unlike anything Zextal had ever witnessed. Instead of the energy weapons favored by most spacefaring species, the Indomitable fired what appeared to be solid projectiles. But these weren't simple kinetic rounds. Each projectile moved at a significant percentage of light speed and struck with the force of a small nuclear weapon. The lead hegemony destroyer's shields collapsed under the first impact. The second projectile punched completely through the ship's armor and detonated inside the hull. The massive warship simply disintegrated, torn apart by internal explosions. 6 more projectiles followed in rapid succession, each one finding a different target. Within 15 seconds, 4 of the 7 destroyers were either destroyed or crippled beyond repair. The remaining 3 hegemony ships immediately changed course, abandoning their attack on the civilians and fleeing at maximum speed toward the edge of the system. Let them go, Captain Shen's voice came across the calm, they can spread the word. Zextal stared at the tactical display in stunned silence. 7 hegemony destroyers, ships that had terrorized the galaxy for years, had been defeated by a single alien vessel in less than 30 seconds. This is Captain Shen to all vessels, the human transmission continued. Civilian transports, you are clear to continue to your destinations. The threat has been neutralized. Captain Shen, Zextal managed to find his voice. We don't know how to thank you. Those transports carry thousands of refugees. You saved them all. Just doing our job, Captain, came the reply. Though I'd appreciate some information about what's been happening in this region. It seems we have some catching up to do. As the Starwind Dancer began escorting the civilian transports away from the battlefield, Zextal couldn't stop staring at the human ship. Where had these Terrans come from? How had they developed such advanced technology? And, more importantly, what did their arrival mean for the balance of power in the galaxy? Behind them, the debris of 4 hegemony destroyers drifted in space, a testament to the fact that the galaxy had just changed forever. The age of hegemony expansion might finally be coming to an end. But Zextal suspected that was only the beginning of the story. 3 hours later, Captain Zextal found himself aboard the most advanced starship he had ever seen. The TFS Indomitable's corridors were wider than those on Galactic Council vessels, designed to accommodate beings larger than most known species. The walls were lined with materials he couldn't identify, and the technology hummed with a quiet efficiency that spoke of superior engineering. Captain Sarah Chen was shorter than he had expected, standing barely chest-height to his own four-armed frame. Her skin was the color of desert sand, and her black hair was pulled back in a practical style. But her dark eyes held an intensity that reminded Zextal of veteran warriors from a dozen different species. "Thank you for accepting our invitation, Captain Zextal," she said, leading him through what appeared to be a research section of the ship. "We need to understand what we've stumbled into here." They entered a large conference room where several other humans waited. Zextal was surprised by the diversity among them, different skin colors, facial features, and body types that suggested these beings came from various genetic backgrounds. "This is Commander James Rodriguez, my executive officer," Chen said, indicating a tall human with bronze skin and graying hair. "Dr. Yuki Tanaka, our xenobiology specialist, and Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Webb, head of our marine contingent." Zextal performed the traditional Valyrian greeting, touching his four hands together in front of his chest. "I am honored to meet you all. I must say, your arrival was most timely. I've never seen hegemony destroyers defeated so easily." Dr. Tanaka, a small human with an eager expression, leaned forward. "We're fascinated by this hegemony you mention. From what we observed, they seem to be using directed energy weapons almost exclusively. Is this typical of military technology in this region? You've never encountered the hegemony?" Commander Rodriguez asked, his tone carrying a note of concern. Zextal settled into a chair that adjusted automatically to accommodate his physiology, another sign of advanced technology. "Forgive me, but we know nothing of your species or your federation. How is it that you've achieved such advanced spaceflight without making contact with the Galactic Council?" Captain Chen exchanged glances with her officers before answering. "We're from what you might call the galactic frontier. Our home system is approximately 8,000 light-years from here, in what our astronomers designated as the Orion Arm. Until recently, we had no idea there was intelligent life in this region of space." 8,000 light-years. Zextal's translator implant worked overtime to convey his astonishment. That was farther than most species had ever traveled. The logistics alone of maintaining contact over such distances should have been impossible. But that's... He paused, trying to process the implications. The energy requirements for hyperspace jumps over such distances. How do your ships maintain coherence across fold space? Dr. Tanaka smiled. "We don't use fold space or hyperspace, Captain. Our ships travel through what we call subspace. It allows for faster-than-light travel without the dimensional instabilities that plague other methods." Subspace? Zextal had never heard the term. "You've developed an entirely different approach to interstellar travel?" "Among other things," Lieutenant Colonel Webb said dryly. "Which brings us back to this hegemony. From what we saw, they seem to favor intimidation and overwhelming force. Tell us about them." For the next hour, Zextal explained the political situation in the known galaxy. The hegemony's rapid expansion, their brutal tactics, the Galactic Council's ineffective response. He described how they had systematically conquered or subjugated dozens of worlds, always choosing targets that were resource-rich but militarily weak. "They operate under something they call the doctrine of supremacy," he explained. "They believe that weaker species should serve stronger ones. Any resistance is met with complete destruction." Captain Chen's expression hardened as she listened. "And the Galactic Council just lets this happen?" "The Council is a democratic body," Zextal said sadly. "Every decision must be debated, voted on, approved by committees. By the time they authorize military action, the hegemony has already moved on to their next target. The defense fleet is spread too thin, always responding to crises instead of preventing them." "What about the species they've conquered?" Dr. Tanaka asked. "What happens to the populations?" "The lucky ones become laborers in their industrial complexes," Zextal replied, his voice heavy with sorrow. "The unlucky ones disappear. The hegemony claims they relocate difficult populations to resettlement colonies, but no one has ever found these colonies." The humans exchanged grim looks. Lieutenant Colonel Webb leaned back in his chair, his jaw tight. "So they're basically space Nazis." "I'm not familiar with that term," Zextal said.
Ancient Earth history, Captain Chen explained. A particularly brutal regime that believed in racial superiority and conquered territory through genocide and slavery.
Then, yes, Zextal said quietly.
That description fits.
Dr. Tanaka pulled up a holographic display showing the local star charts. How many worlds have they taken? In this sector alone? 47 systems have fallen under hegemony control in the past 5 years. Another dozen are under siege or blockade. Zextal highlighted the conquered territories on the map.
They're moving toward the core worlds now. If they take the industrial systems around Kepler 442, they'll have enough manufacturing capacity to challenge the Council directly. Commander Rodriguez studied the tactical situation with professional interest.
What's their military strength? Total fleet size? Unknown exactly, Zextal admitted.
Intelligence estimates put it at least 200 capital ships, plus support vessels. But they keep their main fleet hidden in conquered systems. What we face are usually their expeditionary forces. Like the squadron we just engaged, Captain Chen mused. You destroyed 4 of their most advanced destroyers without taking any damage, Zextal said, still amazed by what he had witnessed.
How is that possible?
Your ship is large, but 7-to-1 odds.
Dr. Tanaka smiled again. Human military doctrine emphasizes survivability and hitting power over speed or maneuverability.
The Indomitable is built to take punishment and dish it out. Her armor is composed of layered ceramics and metal composites that can absorb tremendous energy. Her weapons, well, you saw how effective kinetic projectiles can be when fired at relativistic speeds. But, more importantly, Lieutenant Colonel Webb added, we don't fight fair.
Human military thinking focuses on winning, not on following some code of honor. If we're outnumbered, we use superior technology. If our technology isn't enough, we use superior tactics. If our tactics fail, we change the rules of the game entirely.
Captain Chen activated another holographic display, this one showing the battle they had just fought. The hegemony ships moved in formation, coordinated their attack, and focused their fire on a single target, standard military doctrine for most species, I imagine.
Yes, Zextal confirmed. Concentrated firepower on the strongest enemy unit.
Which assumes your enemy will behave predictably, Commander Rodriguez said. Our defensive systems are designed to handle exactly that kind of attack.
Distributed shielding, redundant armor, rapid damage control. You can't destroy what you can't hurt badly enough.
And our offensive systems are built around the principle of absolute kill capability, Webb continued.
One shot, one kill. No drawn-out battles of attrition. We end fights quickly and decisively.
Zextal was beginning to understand why the hegemony destroyers had been defeated so easily. They had faced an enemy that didn't play by the established rules of galactic warfare.
Captain, he said carefully, may I ask why you're here? 8,000 light-years is a long way to travel just to rescue refugee transports.
Captain Chen was quiet for a moment, then activated another display. This one showed what appeared to be a star map of human space, with dozens of systems highlighted in various colors. 6 months ago, our long-range survey ships detected massive energy signatures from this region of space, she explained.
Weapons discharges, the destruction of orbital installations, the signatures of dying civilizations. We realized there was a war happening out here.
The Terran Federation Council voted to investigate, Commander Rodriguez continued. If there were species in need of assistance, we had an obligation to help. It's part of our founding charter, to stand with the oppressed against tyranny, wherever we find it.
You traveled 8,000 light-years to help species you'd never met? Zextal couldn't hide his amazement. Why? Dr. Tanaka answered with quiet conviction.
Because it was the right thing to do. Humans have a saying, evil triumphs when good people do nothing.
We couldn't ignore what was happening here.
Besides, Webb added with a grim smile, humans have a lot of experience fighting bullies. It tends to make us angry when we see others being bullied. Captain Chen reactivated the tactical display.
Captain Zextal, we need detailed intelligence on hegemony fleet movements, their command structure, their industrial capacity. Can you provide that?
Some of it, yes. But the best intelligence would come from Galactic Defense Fleet headquarters.
If you're serious about confronting the hegemony.
We're very serious, Chen said firmly. But, we need to understand the full scope of the situation before we commit to any course of action. There's something else you should know, Zextal said hesitantly. The 3 destroyers that escaped, they'll report what happened here. Within days, every hegemony commander in this sector will know about your ship and its capabilities.
Good, Lieutenant Colonel Webb said. Let them know we're here. You don't understand, Zextal protested. They'll come looking for you. With overwhelming force. They can't allow a single ship to challenge their supremacy.
Captain Chen smiled, and, for the first time, Zextal saw something predatory in her expression.
Let them come. The Indomitable isn't alone out here. What do you mean?
Commander Rodriguez activated a long-range sensor display. Dozens of new contacts appeared on the screen, all bearing the same configuration as the ship they were currently aboard. The Indomitable is the flagship of Task Force Prometheus, he explained. 48 ships, including 12 dreadnoughts, 24 heavy cruisers, and supporting vessels.
We came prepared for a fight. Zextal stared at the display in shock. 48 ships of the same technological level as the Indomitable?
It was a fleet that could potentially challenge the entire hegemony navy. Captain Chen, he said slowly, I think you need to speak with the Galactic Council immediately.
This changes everything.
That was our plan, she agreed. But, first, we have some hegemony bases to visit.
We want them to know exactly what they're dealing with before we open diplomatic channels. You're going to attack them directly? Dr. Tanaka's expression was grimly satisfied. Captain Zextal, humans have spent most of our history fighting each other. We've gotten very good at warfare.
The hegemony is about to learn what happens when they pick a fight with a species that views war as a science. But, you could be starting an interstellar conflict that might last decades, Zextal warned. Captain Chen stood, her decision clearly made. The conflict already exists, Captain.
The hegemony started it when they began enslaving innocent species. We're just going to finish it.
As Zextal was escorted back to his ship, his mind reeled with the implications of what he had learned.
The humans were not just another species seeking their place in the galaxy.
They were a potential game-changer, possessing technology and military doctrine that could shift the balance of power entirely. But, they were also 8,000 light-years from home, vastly outnumbered, and apparently willing to take on the entire hegemony empire to protect species they had never met.
As his shuttle approached the Starwind Dancer, Zextal couldn't help but wonder if he had just witnessed the beginning of the galaxy's salvation, or its destruction. The answer, he suspected, would depend on just how far the humans were willing to go to keep their promise to stand against tyranny. Behind him, the massive human fleet hung in space like sleeping giants, waiting for their orders to wake and reshape the galaxy forever. Admiral Kefvar of the Hegemony Third Fleet received the survivors' report while reviewing conquest projections in his command chamber aboard the super dreadnought Iron Fist. The Vortak officer who delivered the news was visibly shaken, his usually proud bearing replaced by barely controlled fear. Repeat that, Kefvar demanded, his cybernetic eye focusing on the trembling officer. You're telling me that Squadron Leader Drexmol's entire battle group was destroyed by a single alien vessel?
Yes, sir. The 3 surviving destroyers all report the same thing. Unknown alien ship, massive size, superior technology.
It destroyed 4 destroyers in less than 30 seconds.
Kefvar stood slowly, his 8-foot frame casting a shadow across the tactical displays. Like all Vortak, he had been genetically modified for military service, enhanced strength, improved reflexes, reduced capacity for what the hegemony considered weak emotions like compassion or mercy.
Impossible, he snarled. 7 Nexus-class destroyers represent enough firepower to level a city. No single ship could survive their concentrated attack.
Sir, we have sensor recordings from all 3 survivors. The enemy vessel's defensive capabilities appear to be far beyond anything in our databases.
Kefvar activated his personal display, reviewing the tactical data transmitted by the fleeing ships.
The energy signatures made no sense.
The unknown vessel absorbed plasma cannon fire that should have vaporized any known armor.
And its weapons. Kinetic projectiles, he said incredulously.
They're using solid ammunition?
At approximately 40% light speed, sir. The penetration capabilities are significant. The Admiral stared at the debris field images, trying to process what he was seeing. The destroyed hegemony ships hadn't just been defeated, they had been completely annihilated. The precision of the attack suggested targeting systems of incredible sophistication.
"What do we know about this species?" he demanded.
Very little, sir. They call themselves the Terran Federation.
No previous contact records exist in any hegemony database.
The ship's captain claimed authority to intervene under interstellar law, suggesting they have knowledge of galactic politics despite being unknown to our intelligence services.
Kethvar's mind raced through the implications.
A technologically advanced species with unknown capabilities, operating from an unknown location, and apparently hostile to hegemony expansion. This represented a potential threat to everything the Empire had built. Sir, the officer continued hesitantly, the alien captain specifically mentioned our targeting of civilian vessels.
They seem to take exception to our standard operational procedures. They dare to question hegemony doctrine? Kethvar's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. They protect the weak and criticize the strong?
Yes, sir. The survivors report that the aliens specifically defended refugee transports, even engaging our forces to buy them time to escape.
For a moment, Admiral Kethvar was silent.
In his 30 years of military service, he had never encountered a species foolish enough to challenge the hegemony's right to do as they pleased. Most civilizations either submitted immediately or were crushed before they could mount effective resistance.
But these humans had done neither.
They had simply appeared, announced their intention to interfere, and, then, demonstrated the capability to back up their words with overwhelming force.
"Contact High Command immediately," he ordered. "Priority Alpha transmission. We have a new threat that requires immediate attention." "Sir, what should we do about our ongoing operations in this sector?" Kethvar studied the star charts showing hegemony expansion in the region.
Dozens of systems under siege, supply lines stretching across hundreds of light years, millions of troops committed to conquest operations. Continue the campaign, but with maximum caution. All squadron leaders are to avoid engagement with unknown vessels matching the configuration reported here.
Any contact with these humans is to be reported immediately. And if they interfere with our operations again? The Admiral's cybernetic eye whirred as it focused on the tactical display. Then, we teach them the price of opposing the hegemony. But, first, we need to understand what we're dealing with.
3 days later, the answer came in the form of burning hegemony installations across 12 systems. The attacks were coordinated with military precision that impressed even hegemony tacticians.
The humans didn't simply appear and start shooting. They systematically identified and eliminated strategic targets with surgical accuracy.
At the Mordak mining facility, the human fleet destroyed the orbital weapons platforms and slave processing centers while leaving the mining infrastructure intact.
The enslaved Corellian workers were evacuated to transport ships that appeared as if summoned from nowhere.
At the Vexstar supply depot, human forces eliminated the entire logistics network that supported hegemony operations in 3 sectors. Fuel reserves, ammunition stockpiles, and repair facilities were reduced to vapor in minutes. But, again, the civilian population of the nearby colony was evacuated before the bombardment began. At the fortress world of Kolmath, the humans did something that shocked the entire hegemony military establishment.
Instead of bombarding the planet from orbit, they landed ground forces. Admiral Kethvar watched the battle reports in growing amazement and horror.
Human soldiers, they called them Marines, fought with equipment and tactics that were completely alien to galactic military doctrine. Their armor shrugged off plasma rifle fire that should have killed them instantly. Their weapons fired the same kinetic projectiles as their ships, but somehow miniaturized without losing effectiveness. But it wasn't their technology that disturbed him most. It was their strategy.
The humans weren't trying to conquer Kolmath.
They were liberating it. They specifically targeted hegemony military installations while protecting the enslaved populations. When hegemony forces tried to use civilians as human shields, a standard tactic that had proven effective for decades, the human Marines simply found alternative approaches. They tunneled under fortifications. They dropped from aircraft using personal flight systems. They used devices that seemed to bend light itself to become invisible. Every time the hegemony commanders thought they had cornered the invaders, the humans simply changed the rules of engagement. Within 6 hours, Kolmath was free. The hegemony garrison was destroyed or captured, and the enslaved population was being evacuated by human transport ships. Sir, Kethvar's intelligence officer reported, we're receiving similar reports from across the sector. The humans are hitting our installations systematically, but they're not trying to hold territory. They're just liberating our slaves and destroying our ability to operate in the region.
How many ships are they using? Kethvar demanded.
Estimated 40 to 50 vessels, sir. All of them appear to be of the same technological level as the ship that destroyed Squadron Leader Drexmol's forces. 50 ships. Against a hegemony sector fleet of nearly 200 vessels, it shouldn't have been a contest.
But the humans weren't fighting traditional fleet engagements.
They were conducting surgical strikes, hitting targets of opportunity, and disappearing before hegemony forces could respond in strength.
Where are they coming from? Kethvar asked.
Every ship needs a base of operations.
Supply lines. Maintenance facilities. Unknown, sir.
They appear and disappear without using any hyperspace signatures we can track.
Our sensors can't detect their approach until they're already in system.
This was impossible. Every known method of faster-than-light travel left detectable traces. Ships had to emerge from hyperspace at specific points determined by gravitational fields. The humans seemed to be ignoring the laws of physics entirely.
Admiral, came an urgent transmission from the bridge. High Command is directing you to take personal command of the response to this human threat. You're authorized to use any means necessary to locate and destroy their fleet. Kethvar smiled coldly.
High Command was finally taking this seriously.
What assets am I authorized to deploy? The entire 7th Fleet has been reassigned to your command, sir. Admiral Cortex is en route with 60 additional capital ships.
Combined with your current forces, you'll have operational command of nearly 300 vessels.
300 ships. The largest fleet deployment in hegemony history. Enough firepower to sterilize planets.
And all of it focused on eliminating fewer than 50 alien vessels.
Excellent, Kethvar said. These humans want to play Liberator? Let them learn what happens when you challenge the greatest military force in the galaxy.
But, even as he spoke the words, part of his tactical mind wondered why it was taking 300 ships to hunt down 50. The humans had already proven they could defeat superior numbers through technological advantage and superior strategy.
What made High Command think that simply adding more ships would change the equation?
The answer came 2 hours later, when long-range sensors detected a massive fleet dropping out of whatever transportation method the humans used. Admiral, his sensor officer called out in panic. Multiple contacts emerging at the edge of the system.
Hundreds of them.
The main display flickered to life, showing the tactical situation.
Kethvar's blood ran cold as he counted the new arrivals.
Over 200 vessels, all matching the configuration of the ships that had been terrorizing hegemony installations. But these weren't just the same class of ship they'd encountered before. Among the fleet were vessels that dwarfed even the largest hegemony superdreadnoughts. City-sized mobile fortresses bristling with weapon systems that made the Iron Fist look like a patrol boat. "Sir," the communications officer said in a shaking voice, "we're receiving a transmission from the human fleet.
It's addressed to you personally. Put it through."
The main screen shifted to show a human female in what appeared to be a military uniform. Unlike Captain Chan, this one carried herself with the bearing of someone accustomed to commanding vast fleets. Her gray hair and lined face spoke of decades of experience, but her eyes were sharp and utterly confident.
"Admiral Kethvar," she said, her voice carrying easily through the translation system. "I am Fleet Admiral Elena Vasquez of the Terran Federation Navy. I understand you've been hunting my ships."
Kethvar drew himself to his full height, his cybernetic implants gleaming in the bridge lighting.
"I am Admiral Kethvar, commanding the Hegemony 3rd Fleet. You are in violation of Hegemony territorial space. Surrender immediately or be destroyed." Admiral Vasquez smiled, and there was something predatory in the expression that reminded Kethvar of the apex predators on his homeworld.
"Admiral, I think you misunderstand the situation.
You're not hunting us anymore. We're hunting you. You dare to threaten the hegemony?" Kethvar snarled. "I command nearly 300 ships. Your force, while impressive for aliens, is still outnumbered."
"Actually," Vasquez said calmly, "you're outnumbered. My fleet consists of 412 vessels, including 24 dreadnoughts that outmass your largest ships by a factor of 3.
But, more importantly, Admiral, we're not here to play games. The tactical display updated to show the true scope of the human fleet. Kefvar felt his confidence wavering as he realized that every ship in his command was targeted by multiple human vessels. The technological disparity he had hoped to overcome with numbers had just been turned against him. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice losing some of its authoritative edge. "The immediate cessation of all hegemony military operations in this sector," Vasquez replied. "The release of all enslaved populations under your control. The withdrawal of your forces to hegemony core territories. And a full accounting of war crimes committed by your forces against civilian populations." "Impossible. The hegemony does not negotiate with inferior species." Admiral Vasquez's expression hardened. "Admiral, I'm going to explain something to you that your species seems to have trouble understanding. There are no inferior species in this galaxy. There are only civilizations that choose to be civilized, and those that choose to be monsters. You cannot dictate terms to the hegemony." Kefvar protested. "We are the dominant force in this region of space." "Were," Vasquez corrected. Past tense. "As of today, the Terran Federation is assuming responsibility for the protection of civilian populations in this sector. Your empire is welcome to exist within its current borders, but its expansion ends now." Kefvar looked at his tactical officers, seeing the same realization in their eyes that was growing in his own mind. They weren't just outgunned. They were facing an enemy that had planned this confrontation down to the smallest detail. "You're bluffing," he said, though he could hear the uncertainty in his own voice. "You wouldn't dare attack a hegemony fleet of this size. It would mean war on a galactic scale." "Admiral," Vasquez said gently, "the war has already begun. Your empire started it when it decided that might makes right. We're simply here to finish it. You have exactly 10 minutes to begin withdrawing your forces from this system. Any ship that hasn't entered hyperspace by then will be considered hostile and dealt with accordingly." The transmission ended, leaving Kefvar staring at a blank screen while his officers waited for orders that could determine the fate of their entire fleet. Around them, the human vessels held their positions with ominous patience, like predators allowing their prey to choose how they preferred to die. For the first time in his military career, Admiral Kefvar found himself facing an enemy that was not only technologically superior, but absolutely convinced of the righteousness of their cause. It was a combination that terrified him more than any weapon system ever could. The Galactic Council chambers had never hosted an emergency session quite like this one. Representatives from 47 species filled the amphitheater, their voices creating a cacophony of languages and dialects that even the advanced translation system struggled to process. At the center of it all, Chancellor Mordash of the Eltarian Confederation called for order with increasing desperation. "Please, honored delegates," the elderly Eltarian pleaded, his scales shifting to the deep blue of extreme stress. "We must maintain diplomatic protocols even in these extraordinary circumstances." Extraordinary was an understatement. In the past 72 hours, the galactic political landscape had shifted more dramatically than at any time in recorded history. Hegemony forces were retreating from a dozen systems, their seemingly unstoppable expansion halted by the appearance of a completely unknown military force. Ambassador Vexenal of the Draconian Empire rose from his delegation's seating area, his reptilian features twisted with confusion and anger. "Chancellor, we demand immediate clarification. Our intelligence services report that hegemony fleets are withdrawing from territories they've held for years. What force could compel such a retreat?" "The same force that destroyed 18 hegemony installations without suffering a single casualty," replied Ambassador Yildu of the Corellian Mining Consortium. Her six-legged form trembled with what might have been joy or terror. "The humans have returned our enslaved workers to us. Thousands of our people, freed from hegemony labor camps." A murmur swept through the chamber. The Corellians had been among the first species conquered by the hegemony, their peaceful nature making them ideal targets for enslavement. The idea that someone had actually liberated their people seemed impossible. "Humans?" Chancellor Mordash consulted his data pad frantically. "We have no record of any species by that designation. How can an unknown civilization possess the military capability to challenge the hegemony?" "Perhaps," came a voice from the gallery, "you should ask them directly." Every head in the chamber turned toward the source of the interruption. Standing at the public viewing section was a figure unlike any they had seen before. Tall by most species standards but not unusually so, with pale skin and dark hair arranged in a formal style.
The being wore clothing that appeared to be some form of diplomatic uniform, marked with symbols that meant nothing to any of the assembled delegates. "I am Ambassador Thomas Harrison of the Terran Federation," the figure continued, descending toward the chamber floor with a confidence that suggested familiarity with diplomatic procedures. "I apologize for the unusual introduction, but the current crisis requires immediate attention." Chancellor Mordash's scales had now shifted to a pale yellow, a color indicating complete bewilderment. "Ambassador Harrison, while we appreciate your dramatic arrival, proper diplomatic protocols require advance notice, credentials verification, and," Chancellor Harrison interrupted politely but firmly, with respect, "proper diplomatic protocols also require that member species not engage in systematic slavery, genocide, and territorial conquest." Since the hegemony has been violating galactic law for years while this body debated appropriate responses, the Terran Federation felt that immediate action took precedence over paperwork. The chamber erupted in shouts and arguments as delegates processed this unprecedented breach of diplomatic etiquette. Ambassador Kretak of the hegemony delegation rose to his full imposing height, his artificially enhanced frame designed to intimidate. "How dare you!" he roared. "The hegemony operates under legitimate authority granted by galactic expansion treaties. We claim no territory not rightfully ours by conquest." Ambassador Harrison turned to face the hegemony representative with an expression of polite interest. "Ambassador Kretak, I've reviewed your expansion treaties extensively. Fascinating documents, really. They essentially state that any species capable of taking territory from another species has the right to do so. Is that an accurate summary?" "The strong have always ruled the weak," Kretak declared proudly. "It is the natural order." "I see," Harrison said thoughtfully. "So you would agree that if a stronger force appeared and took your territory, that would also be legitimate under your own legal framework?" The hegemony ambassador's expression shifted as he realized the trap he had walked into. "That is different. The hegemony has held its territories for decades. We have established rights which are now being challenged by a superior force," Harrison said smoothly. "By your own doctrine, this is perfectly legitimate. The Terran Federation is simply demonstrating that we are stronger than the hegemony." Chancellor Mordash managed to restore some semblance of order to the chamber. "Ambassador Harrison, while your logic is provocative, the Galactic Council cannot simply ignore proper procedures. We need to understand who your people are, where you come from, and what authority you possess to intervene in galactic affairs." Harrison activated a holographic projector that materialized in the center of the chamber. The display showed a three-dimensional map of local space, but the perspective was unlike anything the delegates had seen before. Instead of focusing on the galactic core regions where most civilizations originated, this map showed vast areas of previously unexplored space. "The Terran Federation represents 37 star systems in what you call the Outer Rim," Harrison explained. "Our civilization developed independently, approximately 8,000 light-years from the nearest council member species. We achieved interstellar capability 12 years ago and have been quietly observing galactic civilizations since then, but..." "Observing us?" Ambassador Yilda asked nervously. "We wanted to understand the political and social structures of established galactic civilization before making contact," Harrison continued. "What we found was troubling. A democratic council that debates while species are enslaved. Defense forces spread too thin to protect anyone. And an expansionist empire that uses superior firepower to subjugate weaker civilizations." Ambassador Vex Nal leaned forward aggressively. "Are you suggesting that galactic civilization is somehow deficient?" "I'm stating that it has failed to protect its own members," Harrison replied bluntly. "The Corellians appealed to this council for protection 17 times over the past 3 years. Each appeal was referred to committee, debated, and ultimately ignored while their people were enslaved. The draconian colonies in the Vega system requested assistance against hegemony raids 43 times. Your own delegation voted to study the situation while your own species was being conquered." The draconian ambassador's expression grew dangerous, but Harrison continued without pause. "The Terran Federation has a different approach to these problems. When we see innocent beings threatened by aggressors, we act. When we see slavery and genocide, we stop it. When we encounter bullies, we teach them that there are consequences to their actions." "And what gives you the right?" Ambassador Kretak demanded. "You admit you are not part of galactic civilization. You have no standing here." Harrison's expression hardened slightly. We have the right of any civilized species to protect the innocent from predators. We have the obligation of any advanced civilization to use our capabilities responsibly. And, we have the authority granted to us by 47 species who have requested our protection in the past week.
The chamber fell silent as delegates processed this claim.
47 species requesting protection from an unknown civilization? It was unprecedented. That's impossible, Chancellor Mordash said weakly. We would have been notified of any such requests. Chancellor, with respect, most of those species have already appealed to this council multiple times without receiving assistance. They contacted us directly through the communication networks we established during our observation period.
Ambassador Yilda rose from her position. The Corellian Mining Consortium formally requests Terran Federation protection under any terms you deem appropriate. This council has failed to protect our people. The humans have already done more for us in 1 week than the Galactic Council has accomplished in 3 years. One by one, other delegates began standing. The Aquatic Alliance of Seti Tau. The Silicon-based collective of the Rigel sector. The nomadic fleets of the Perseus Arm. Species after species formally requested Terran protection while the hegemony representative watched in growing horror. This is illegal.
Kretak protested. These species are bound by existing treaties. They cannot simply change allegiances. Actually, Harrison said, consulting a datapad, I've reviewed the relevant treaties extensively. Article 15 of the Galactic Mutual Defense Compact specifically allows member species to seek outside protection if the Council proves unable or unwilling to defend them. Since the Council has demonstrably failed to protect any of these species from hegemony aggression, their requests are perfectly legal.
Chancellor Mordash looked around the chamber in bewilderment.
Ambassador Harrison, what exactly are you proposing? A complete restructuring of galactic politics? I'm proposing that civilization actually becomes civilized, Harrison replied. The Terran Federation is prepared to offer protection, trade agreements, and technological assistance to any species that requests it. We're also prepared to guarantee that aggressive expansion by any power will be met with immediate and overwhelming force. You cannot possibly have the military strength to back up such claims, Ambassador Vexen said, though his voice carried less conviction than before. Harrison smiled, and, for the first time, the expression wasn't entirely diplomatic.
Ambassador, 3 days ago the Hegemony Third Fleet consisted of nearly 300 ships.
As of this morning, Admiral Kethvar has 46 vessels under his command. The remainder are either destroyed or have been captured by our forces. The silence that followed was deafening. The Hegemony Third Fleet had been one of their most powerful military units, capable of conquering entire star systems. The idea that it had been effectively eliminated by an unknown force was almost incomprehensible.
Impossible, Kretak whispered.
I can provide sensor logs if you'd like, Harrison offered politely. Though I should mention that Admiral Kethvar and his remaining forces are currently en route to Hegemony space under escort by our ships. They've been released as a gesture of good faith, along with a message for your high command.
What message? Kretak demanded, though he looked like he dreaded the answer.
That the Terran Federation is prepared to discuss terms for the peaceful coexistence of our civilizations, Harrison replied. But, that any further aggressive actions against civilian populations will be met with the complete destruction of hegemony military forces. He turned to address the chamber as a whole. Delegates, the Terran Federation has no desire to rule or control galactic civilization. We simply want to ensure that it actually lives up to its own stated principles. We're prepared to work with anyone committed to peace, justice, and the protection of innocent life.
And, if we refuse? Chancellor Mordash asked quietly.
Harrison's expression grew serious. Then, you'll discover that humans have a very long history of fighting for what we believe is right, regardless of the odds against us.
The choice is yours, but I'd recommend making it quickly.
There are a lot of species out there who have been waiting for someone to stand up to the bullies. We'd prefer to work with established galactic institutions rather than replace them, but we'll do whatever is necessary to protect innocent life. As the implications of his words settled over the chamber, Ambassador Harrison checked his timepiece, a strange device that none of the delegates recognized. I'll give you time to discuss this among yourselves, he said diplomatically. But, I should mention that Fleet Admiral Vasquez is currently en route to the Hegemony capital system with 400 ships.
If you'd like to influence how that meeting proceeds, I'd suggest reaching a decision soon.
With that, the human ambassador turned and walked calmly from the chamber, leaving behind a collection of delegates who were only beginning to understand that their galaxy would never be the same again. Emperor Vorthake the Conqueror had earned his title through 30 years of systematic brutality. His throne room aboard the massive command station Imperium was a monument to the power of the hegemony, walls lined with the weapons of conquered species, floors made from rare stones taken from subjugated worlds, and a throne carved from the crystallized remains of an entire planet. None of it impressed Fleet Admiral Elena Vasquez. The human officer stood before the Emperor's throne with her hands clasped behind her back, flanked by 2 Marine guards whose powered armor made them appear nearly as large as the hegemony's genetically enhanced soldiers. Her expression was politely neutral as she waited for the Emperor to finish his theatrical display of power. "So," Emperor Vorthake rumbled, his voice amplified by implants that made every word resonate through the chamber, "the primitive aliens think they can dictate terms to the greatest empire in galactic history." Admiral Vasquez tilted her head slightly. "Your Majesty, I prefer to think of this as a conversation between civilized leaders seeking to avoid unnecessary bloodshed. Though I should point out that your empire's history spans approximately 2 centuries, which barely qualifies as a footnote in terms of galactic history." The Emperor's cybernetic implants whirred as his enhanced nervous system processed what he clearly considered an insult. Around the throne room, dozens of hegemony officials and military officers shifted nervously. None of them had ever heard anyone speak to their emperor with such casual disrespect. "You dare mock the hegemony's achievements?" Vorthake snarled. "We have conquered 47 star systems. We command the loyalty of billions of subjects. You've enslaved 47 star systems and terrorized billions of victims," Vasquez corrected calmly. "There's a significant difference." General Kexfor, the Emperor's chief military advisor, stepped forward aggressively. "Alien, you will show proper respect to His Imperial Majesty, or what?" Vasquez asked, her tone remaining conversational. "You'll threaten me?" "General, I'm standing in the middle of your most heavily defended facility, surrounded by your most elite troops, in the presence of your absolute ruler. If I were concerned about threats, I wouldn't have accepted your invitation." Emperor Vorthake leaned forward on his throne, studying the human with newfound interest. "You're either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish, alien." "Perhaps both," Vasquez admitted. "But, mostly, I'm incredibly tired of watching your forces murder innocent people while the galaxy's legitimate authorities debate appropriate responses." "Legitimate authorities?" The Emperor's laugh was a harsh sound that echoed through the chamber. "The Galactic Council is a collection of weak-willed species hiding behind diplomatic protocols while the strong claim what is rightfully theirs. We are the legitimate authority in this region of space." Admiral Vasquez activated a holographic projector, filling the center of the throne room with a 3-dimensional tactical display. The map showed the current disposition of military forces throughout the sector, with hegemony positions marked in red and human positions in blue. "Your Majesty," she said politely, "I'd like to show you the current strategic situation." The Emperor stared at the display in growing disbelief. Blue markers surrounded every major hegemony installation, often outnumbering the red markers by significant margins. What had been an empire spanning dozens of star systems now appeared to be a collection of isolated outposts surrounded by enemy forces. "This is impossible," General Kexfor said hoarsely. "Our intelligence reports show your forces number fewer than 500 ships." "Your intelligence is correct," Vasquez confirmed. "We currently have 412 vessels deployed in this sector." "Then, how?" Emperor Vorthake gestured at the tactical display. "You cannot be besieging a dozen systems simultaneously with such a small force." "Actually, we can," Vasquez said patiently. "Human military doctrine emphasizes mobility, concentration of force, and rapid deployment. We're not trying to hold territory, Your Majesty. We're simply ensuring that your forces cannot continue their aggressive operations." She highlighted several positions on the map. "For example, your fortress at Colmath is currently surrounded by 40 human vessels. Your garrison there numbers approximately 10,000 troops and is supported by orbital defense platforms. Under normal circumstances, it would take a significant invasion force to neutralize such a position." "But, you haven't invaded," the Emperor said, beginning to understand. "We didn't need to," Vasquez explained. "We simply informed your garrison commander that any attempt to harm civilian populations would result in the immediate destruction of his entire force. He's chosen to keep his troops confined to barracks while the civilian population evacuates."
Very sensible decision. General Kexvor's expression darkened. You're holding our own forces hostage.
I prefer to think of it as giving them an incentive to behave in a civilized manner, Vasquez replied. Though I should mention that 3 of your garrison commanders chose to ignore our warnings. Their facilities no longer exist.
The throne room fell silent as the implications sank in. The hegemony's military doctrine was based on the principle that superior firepower could overcome any opposition. But the humans weren't engaging in traditional military confrontations.
They were simply making it impossible for hegemony forces to function effectively.
What do you want?
Emperor Vorthake asked finally, his voice lacking its earlier bravado. Admiral Vasquez deactivated the holographic display and looked directly at the Emperor. The immediate cessation of all military operations against civilian populations.
The release of all enslaved beings currently held in hegemony territories.
The withdrawal of your forces to the borders that existed 5 years ago, before your current expansion began.
Impossible.
The Emperor surged to his feet, his massive frame trembling with rage.
The hegemony does not retreat.
We do not negotiate with inferior species.
Your Majesty, Vasquez said quietly, let me explain something about human psychology.
We have a concept called justice that is central to our civilization.
When we see innocent beings suffering, we feel compelled to act.
When we see bullies terrorizing the weak, we feel obligated to stop them.
This isn't negotiation. This is us telling you how things are going to be from now on. You threaten the hegemony?
General Kexvor's hand moved toward his sidearm. The 2 human marines flanking Admiral Vasquez didn't move, but the subtle whine of charging weapons systems filled the air. The general's hand froze as he realized that his action had been anticipated.
General, Vasquez said calmly, I wouldn't recommend that course of action.
My marines have been watching you since we entered this chamber. They're very good at their jobs.
Emperor Vorthake stared at the humans in growing realization. You're not here to negotiate at all, are you? You've already decided what's going to happen. Partly correct, Vasquez agreed.
We've decided that the suffering your empire has caused will end immediately.
How that happens is up to you.
You can choose to comply with our demands and transition to a more civilized form of government. Or you can choose to resist, and we'll dismantle your military capability ship by ship, base by base, until you can no longer threaten innocent life.
And if we comply? What guarantee do we have that you won't simply destroy us anyway? Admiral Vasquez considered the question seriously. Your Majesty, humans have a saying, actions speak louder than words.
In the past 2 weeks, we've had multiple opportunities to simply annihilate hegemony forces. Instead, we've consistently chosen to disable your military assets while protecting civilian populations, including your own civilians. She activated her personal communicator.
Computer, display human casualty figures for current operations. A holographic readout appeared showing detailed statistics.
Emperor Vorthake studied the numbers in disbelief. These figures show 0 human casualties, he said slowly.
That's correct, Vasquez confirmed.
In 2 weeks of military operations against your forces, we haven't lost a single ship or soldier. But, more importantly, look at the civilian casualty figures. The Emperor's eyes widened as he read the data. 23,000 hegemony civilians evacuated from combat zones.
Medical assistance provided to 14,000 wounded.
Emergency relief supplies distributed to 47 affected colonies.
We're not here to destroy your people, Your Majesty.
We're here to stop your government from destroying others. There's a significant difference. For several minutes, the throne room was silent except for the hum of life support systems and the distant sounds of the massive space station's operations. Emperor Vorthake sat heavily on his throne, his enhanced physique suddenly seeming more burden than advantage.
If I agree to your terms, he said quietly, what becomes of the hegemony?
That's up to you, Vasquez replied.
Many successful civilizations have transitioned from conquest-based expansion to peaceful cooperation.
Your people have impressive technological capabilities and could contribute significantly to galactic civilization if directed toward constructive purposes.
You would help us make such a transition? Admiral Vasquez smiled for the first time since entering the chamber.
Your Majesty, humans have extensive experience with rehabilitation of militaristic societies. We'd be happy to share that knowledge with you.
General Kexvor stepped forward hesitantly. And our military forces? Would be restructured as a defensive fleet, responsible for protecting hegemony territory and citizens, Vasquez explained. There are plenty of legitimate threats in the galaxy: pirates, natural disasters, scientific expeditions requiring protection. Your soldiers could serve with honor in roles that actually protect rather than subjugate. Emperor Vorthake was quiet for a long time, staring at the tactical display that showed his empire surrounded by human forces. Finally, he looked directly at Admiral Vasquez. Admiral, I have one question. If our situations were reversed, and it was human forces threatening innocent species throughout the galaxy, what would you want someone to do? Vasquez met his gaze steadily. I would want them to stop us by any means necessary. Justice isn't conditional on who happens to be in power. The Emperor nodded slowly. Then, I accept your terms. The hegemony will comply with your demands.
3 months later, Captain Zextal of the merchant vessel Starwind Dancer watched as former hegemony forces worked alongside Galactic Defense Fleet ships to evacuate civilians from a planet threatened by solar flares. The cooperation between former enemies was still awkward, but it was happening. The transformation hadn't been easy. Several hegemony commanders had refused to accept the new order and had been forcibly removed by human forces. Some outlying territories had attempted to declare independence and continue aggressive operations, only to discover that human fleets could appear anywhere in the galaxy with remarkable speed. But the changes were undeniable. Millions of enslaved beings had been freed. Aggressive expansion had ended. The galaxy's resources were being redirected from conquest to exploration, from domination to cooperation. Captain, his communications officer called out, incoming transmission from the TFS Indomitable. Zextal smiled as Captain Chen's familiar face appeared on the screen. The human officer looked tired but satisfied. Captain Zextal, good to see you again, she said warmly. I wanted to thank you for recommending those trade routes through the former hegemony territories. The economic integration is proceeding faster than we expected. It's the least I could do, Zextal replied. After all, you humans kept your promise. You stood against tyranny, no matter the cost. We had help, Chen said with a slight smile. Turns out there were a lot of people in the galaxy who were ready to stand up to bullies. They just needed someone to show them it was possible. As the transmission ended, Zextal looked out at the stars and reflected on how much had changed since that day when he had chosen to place his small ship between hegemony destroyers and refugee transports. He had been prepared to die to buy those civilians a few extra minutes of life. Instead, he had witnessed the arrival of a species that had traveled 8,000 light-years to keep a simple promise, that aid would come to those who needed it, no matter how far away or how dangerous the journey. The galaxy was safer now because sometimes, when everything seemed lost and hope was fading, someone would emerge from the void with the power and determination to make things right. And, sometimes, that someone was human.